I've been thinking that the passage for this week, which is based on joy, Mary's joy, the story of Mary and Elizabeth and a beautiful Magnificat. Well, I've been thinking that was the passage for this week, but it's actually not. It's next week. And then I began to think about Joseph's story and why we seldom have even a chance to see who he was, hear it from his perspective. He sort of sits back in the shadows during this whole segment of the light coming into the world. It didn't seem like light to him, I don't imagine. I imagine it was a dark moment in his life. Try to imagine for a moment what his life was like. Put yourself in the shoes of a man in first century Palestine, a Jewish man, brought up in a pretty strict environment. Imagine what the process of finding a good wife is like in that setting. Marriages are based on family ties, structured roles of men and women, and so on. It's not about romance and love, not always. It's about duty and need and practicality. It's about having children to carry on the family trade and a woman to handle the household tasks. Marriages are arranged. That doesn't mean that there can't be some attraction between people who may have seen each other in the marketplace, or between young people who have seen one another at family or community gatherings. Maybe even they have played together as children, brought up in the same small village. But we can probably safely assume that they haven't had any chance to be together alone. There would always be a chaperone of some sort readily available, at least at their ages. Joseph knows the rules. He understands the customs and the mores. Yes, the way of life among the Jewish people was, well, pretty set. After a man chooses and the parents of the bride consent, there is a waiting period of 1 year in which there is supervised contacts, a testing period. Will this union work? Is the bride worthy? Will the groom provide a stable home? You might see it as a time for the families to woo one another, if not the couple to do the same thing. Nazareth was a small village in Galilee. The families of this town almost assuredly knew one another pretty well. They'd lived in close proximity for many years and had a sense of who was who. The Bible tells us very little about this pair of people who will raise Jesus. Church traditions often try to fill in the gaps and make Joseph much older than Mary, and it wouldn't be unusual that the man be at least a few years older than the bride. She might be just a young teenager. This is another reason for the waiting period, for her to be old enough to take on the full responsibility of adulthood and marriage. The perfect wife, the perfect wife in that setting would be young, mild-mannered, hardworking, willing to learn her role in the family, and pure. You know what I mean. Unsullied, prepared to meet a man for the first time and be taught the duties and joys of matrimony only by him. Because the village was small, I'm going to guess that Joseph and Mary knew each other. Though sometimes women were given in marriage to strangers to seal some kind of family ties or business arrangements. So he may or may not have cared deeply for her. But there's obviously some respect for her and or for her family. Joseph is a carpenter. The actual word could mean something more like mason or builder, someone who worked with his hands and made things, not an upper class position, but respectable. They are both of working class and not wealthy by any means. As a matter of fact, later, at least in the way Luke tells the stories, they will sacrifice turtle doves at the circumcision of Jesus. The sacrifice normally would be a lamb if they were able to afford that. From this, we can deduce that they were not wealthy. So Joseph is betrothed to Mary. Imagine the mixture of feelings. He's taking a wife. The bride price is paid. The age-old words have been spoken between him and her father, and the father says, "You shall be my son-in-law." The deal is almost sealed. She will soon come to live with him. Up to this point, Joseph is looking forward to life, to a happy occasion when the final wedding ceremony would take place and he would live with his bride. They would bear children in time. In his culture, this meant the time when he would be fully considered a man, a time of great respect, of great pleasure, of great joy. Two good families would come together. It had been a wonderful year. Things are going according to schedule until Joseph learns the unthinkable. His life is suddenly in shambles, his trust betrayed, his future undone, and his insides torn up. He isn't responsible for Mary's unplanned, unforgivable, indefensible, inexcusable pregnancy. Joseph's dreams have been shattered. He wants to ask Mary, how did this happen? But a part of him doesn't really want to know how this betrayal happened. Nor does he want to hear the whispers that will be as much about his indiscretion as hers. Joseph decides to break off the engagement quietly. His joy has been swallowed, first in disbelief, then in anger and a sense of betrayal, and at last in pity. He knows the child's not his. He's betrayed, cheated on, even before the final ritual. The gospel says, and as he pondered this, just as Mary was said to ponder these things in her heart. I'd say brooded over might be a better way of putting it. Can you just imagine the ponderings of his heart? She must have no love. She must have no respect for him. It would be obvious had he not only lost his woman, but the community would surely lose respect for him as well. Perhaps they would be left behind his back. He becomes downcast. He's heartbroken. This news is devastating to him. How could she? And yet, it becomes obvious to us that he is a compassionate man. He knows Mary's precarious circumstance. Maybe she can go far away to find a relative to live with, pretend to be widowed. So in his pondering, he has already decided that he will privately divorce her, change his mind about the ceremony, save face for both of them, and save her life. So even before the angel appeared on the scene, Joseph has already chosen the grace-filled way to treat this situation, a compassionate way for a man in his circumstances and for a young girl in her circumstances. Joseph is pulled back from his thoughts, from his ponderings by a voice. The angel tells him what is happening and what he should then do. But realize that before that, Joseph has proven himself the kind of man worthy of helping to raise the child Jesus. He is a gentle and compassionate man, thoughtful and wise. Now, in some ways, Joseph stays in the background in all the Christmas story. Luke hardly mentions him, even when upgrading the shepherds to a serenade by angels. Joseph is in a supporting role. He doesn't get a single line of dialogue in all of the New Testament. In manger scenes, Mary and Jesus are at the center stage. Joseph is back there in the shadows. He's often hard to distinguish from the shepherds. You know, in our home creches on the coffee table, and it's happened to me more than once, Joseph gets dropped and his head gets knocked off. That often happens to ceramic Josephs. You can always promote a shepherd who can still stand there in the background looking admiringly at the baby and look just like Joseph. In paintings, Joseph looks worn with fatigue, his face lined with anxiety. He seems like he would be more comfortable at a funeral than at a birth. It's easy to imagine Joseph as cautious and careful. Carpenters usually aren't considered thrill seekers. Measure twice, cut once. That's their rule. When Matthew describes Joseph as just and righteous, we picture an earnest, meticulous craftsman whose business, working with his hands, is all the excitement that he wants. This long expected Jesus is coming pretty fast for Joseph. He's being asked to assume responsibility for a young girl and her baby with only a voice in a dream to go on. Now, leaving Mary while still protecting her and getting on with his own life is the reasonable thing to do. It's not hard to ignore an angel's whisper. Even if Joseph could convince himself to believe Mary, no one else will. He should shake it off and call his lawyer, right? Acting honorably is easy. Dismiss the dream as just a dream and walk away. Haven't we all forgotten dreams with more details than that one had? But Joseph is an honorable man. And he changes his mind, consciously making the choice to be the father to Jesus, to take any ridicule that might come their way, to treat Mary with respect and dignity, and taking the course they have started already. How do we treat those who so bitterly disappoint us, who fail in our eyes to live up to the strong moral structure that we have laid out for our own lives? By whose rules do we live and expect others to live? Are we as grace-filled and compassionate as Joseph, even in our great disappointments and our great betrayals? I know that when I feel betrayed, when someone has greatly offended my sensitivities, I can get all huffy and angry and out of sorts. You can ask my husband this. My ponderings are usually done out loud, maybe too loud, and I often regret those ponderings being public ponderings instead of private. Most of us, at least at first, look at such things as betrayal from the angle of revenge, not from the perspective of compassion and understanding as Joseph did. The lesson is to be learned here from the one whom God chose to be the dad to Jesus. This was a man who was to teach the young boy patience and practicality, probably carpentry or masonry, and coolness in the moment. Perhaps it was Joseph from whom Jesus learned the qualities he needed to be known as the Prince of Peace. Maybe Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount came from experiencing such a tutor as Joseph, Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the peacemakers. Love your enemies. Bless and do not curse. Perhaps Joseph taught him that it was more important to be in God's good favor than the favor of human beings. Perhaps he learned from his dad that rules were made to help people and not people for the rules. What lessons can we learn from this gentle and wise and good, righteous man who faced times of adversity with grace? So Mary was full of grace, as we will hear in next week's passages. But I want you to remember Joseph, Joseph full of grace. He was there too.